But again, Paul didn't stay around very long. And there was this strong Jewish subculture in the cities of Asia Minor. Right? These are the same cities. Lystra was one of those cities that Paul is writing to in this encyclical. In Lystra, they stoned Paul and left him for dead. That's how strong the Jewish influence was in these cities. And out of that Jewish subculture in Asia Minor, or worse, out of a Christian subculture that thought of itself as a sect of the Jewish subculture, which they should have known better, there come these teachers who think that they can fill in the gaps, as though there were any, in Paul's teachings. Of course you feel guilt and shame. You should, because you aren't following the law. You know Paul called you children of Abraham, but you aren't. Do you believe in Jesus Christ? That's a good start. But you have a long way to go. You know what you've done. You know your past. You know that you have a lot to make up for. You're going to have to start to obey the law. You're going to have to pick up all the ceremonies. We've been doing this for years and years and years. You better start practicing and acting like we do, because we obviously have it right. We've been purifying our souls through all these ceremonies and these rituals and these washings and the way that we eat and the way that we dress and the way that we separate ourselves from society. We've been doing everything we can for years to purify ourselves from the pollution of this pagan culture that we're a part of. What makes you think that you can be there already? And then they really twist the lie in deep. Believing in Jesus Christ, well, that's a nice start. But you're not children of Abraham. Oh no. Think about what you've done. You're not there, not yet. And so in this passage, Paul is going to use that very arrogance, their own philosophies, against them as he counterattacks these ideas. And it's actually a pretty brilliant counterattack. He says, you want to go to the law? You really want to claim Abraham as your father and say it's all about following the law? Well, let's look at the full arc of the story, shall we? Verse 21 again, he says, tell me, you who want to be under the law, are you not aware of what the law says? For it is written that Abraham had 2 sons, one by a slave woman and one by a free woman. He says, you want to claim Abraham as your father? Great. But you need to understand there are 2 cultures that can do that. There were 2 sons of Abraham. There are 2 people groups that are directly descended from him. One son was Ishmael, and he was born the ordinary way. The other was Isaac, and he was born by a promise. And if you know the story, you know what happened in all of that. You see, in the story, God had come to Abraham, Abraham and Sarah both actually, as they were both advanced in years, and he said, hey, I'm going to give you 2 a child. I know you don't have a son yet. I know that's important to you, Abraham. I know it's important to you because you don't have an heir. I'm going to provide for you an heir. But Abraham, here's the thing. From your child, you're going to have this great family. You're going to have many descendants, and you will be a great nation. And through your descendants, I'm going to bless all the nations of the earth. But then they waited, and they waited, and they waited. And now Abraham was very old, and Sarah was very old. Okay, this might have been insulting to you. Maybe not very old. They were mid-70s. Women, though, in their mid-70s, you may not be aware of this, women in their mid-70s don't have babies. And don't give me examples of modern culture in which 70-year-olds have had babies. They are all IVF babies. Because the reason why women in their 70s don't have babies is because you know this. The processes don't work anymore. So Sarah, in her mid-70s, finally turned to Abraham and says, maybe we're supposed to do something about all of this. I mean, I'm barren. I'm in my mid-70s. I'm desolate. I have never had children. My culture says that I'm a failure to you as a wife because I've never given you a son, and I'm ashamed, and I should feel ashamed. And so there's only one thing that we can do, Abraham, to remove my shame. See, in those days, it was perfectly legal that if a woman had a slave, if a couple had a slave, that woman, if she gave her permission, could give that slave to her husband, and if they conceived, then that woman would be the actual legal mother of that child, even though the child was of the slave woman. And so Sarah was using this loophole to get a child her way. And so Abraham is confronted with a choice. He could either go his own path and get what he wanted through his own human ability. And by the way, as we know, biologically, that still works in 80-year-old men. Or he could trust God. By the way, that's always the choice. You can either go your own way and try and do things by your own ability, or you can trust God. And so he and Sarah decided, we're not going to wait for God. We're going to do it our way because we're just tired of waiting. And so Abraham and Sarah moved out using their own human ability, and through that human ability, they got Ishmael, born according to the flesh, the ordinary way. But a few years later, when Sarah is 80, God brings them a miracle through Sarah. They have Isaac. But the son of the slave was born according to the flesh, while the son of the free woman was born through promise. So Paul's counterattack goes like this. There are real events that happened, but they can also be understood allegorically. The allegory points us to the home of the free. Not the land of the brave, just the home of the free. Paul says, now this may be interpreted allegorically. These women are two covenants. These were real events, but we can also understand them figuratively. The Greek word used, translated there on the screen allegorically, is allegoreo. Doesn't take much imagination to figure out what that means. It means allegory. So when you're looking at the screen in English, you're basically looking at it in Greek as well. But honestly, when you look at this, you go, how is this an allegory? I mean, it just looks like the story. Well, keep going. We'll look at it. Paul is saying that this represents two ways of relating to God. But these two children, these two sons, were literally the results of two completely different approaches to God. Not just figuratively, literally, not just literally, but also figuratively. Do I work out what I want with my own human ability, or do I wait for God and let it be completely, everything that happens, be completely dependent on Him? Literally, every human being on earth is grouped into one of those two camps. Am I going to do everything myself, or am I going to wait for God? And sometimes we move fluidly between those two camps, don't we? Paul's argument is this: when you go the human way, depending on your own ability to perform, you become a slave. See, Abraham knew the promises of God. So why did he go with Sarah's plan? Why does any man go with a plan like that? Well, I think you know the reason why. But it got him what he wanted. It worked. They had Ishmael. But look at how it works out in Sarah's life. We're told in the story in Genesis that Hagar felt self-righteous. The slave woman felt self-righteous over her mistress. And her mistress, Sarah, felt like dirt because of this. Even more worthless than she did before when she was just barren. Now she was barren, and she was proven that she was less useful. This is before Isaac. And she's proven that she's even less useful than her slave is to her husband. In other words, she's a slave in practice, if not in name. But of course, the story doesn't end there. God does bring them a child through Sarah, a miraculous child. And now Ishmael has a younger brother, Isaac. But of course, Isaac was the favorite of their father because Isaac came through the woman that Abraham loved. He had no love for Hagar. And so because of that, Isaac is the favorite, and Ishmael is sort of this second-hand, even though he's the oldest, he's the second-handed one. And so it's only natural then for poor Ishmael to take out his lack of acceptance on Isaac because Ishmael isn't loved. There's jealousy involved in that. And so Abraham's role as father is full of conflict in all of this. He becomes ensnared by the dynamics of these relationships, Sarah and Hagar, Ishmael and Isaac. And by following his own human ability, Abraham screwed up his life. He messed up his relationship with Sarah again. And I mean, it's amazing how often and how completely Abraham can screw up his relationship with Sarah. It's a screw up of, shall we say, biblical proportions? But he also messes up his relationship with his sons. And all of those relationships become like bondage to everyone in those relationships.